Hello and welcome to this introduction to the revised Racing Rules of Sailing 2021 to 2024, published by World Sailing, this edition by the RYA. I am Robin Meads and I'm a national judge in the UK. There have been several changes in the RRS this time round. They do this every 4 years. There have been quite a few changes to the placing of rules, so the old rule numbers may have been switched around, but the rules haven't changed that much. In other cases, there have been significant changes to the rules, both for competitors, protest committees and race officers to take note of. So we will deal with the main changes in this cycle. Of particular relevance to the officials putting together the Notice of Race and Sailing Instructions are two changes. One is to the Part 2 preamble, and this states that where races are being run under the international regulations rather than the Racing Rules of Sailing, this must be stated in the NOR. The old rule book said it should be stated in the sailing instructions. In Rule 5, it has now been made clear that the Racing Rules of Sailing also apply to the organising authority, the race committee, protest committee and technical committee. The new Rule 37 deals with search and rescue and is of particular relevance to safety teams, the race officer and those drawing up the sailing instructions. It states that when the race committee displays flag V, Victor, with one sound signal, then all boats shall listen on the communications channel and stand by for instructions for search and rescue. This also means, of course, that it is no longer possible to use flag V for anything else. There is an amendment to Rule 60.1 that states or clarifies really that a boat, a race committee or a technical committee may submit a report to lead to disciplinary action. Of particular interest to race organisers, Rule 25.1 now states that the NOR must be available to a boat before they enter. This rule also states that the sailing instructions must be available to each boat before the relevant race begins. A significant change for race organisers is in Appendix J, which deals with Notice of Race and Sailing Instructions. This quite clearly states that anything stated in the NOR need not be repeated in the sailing instructions. This will cut down on quite a lot of the drafting and paperwork, but it should be borne in mind that it is even more important then to make sure that whatever rules need to be introduced in those documents are placed in the correct document. So let us go on to the on-the-water situation. One clarification is in the definition mark. This now states that anything intentionally attached to an object or race committee vessel that is acting as a mark is part of the mark. It is still the case that anything accidentally attached to it is not part of the mark, and also nor is an anchor line. The definition mark room has also been clarified so that it includes room to round or past the mark without touching the mark. There have been significant changes in this edition to the definitions for start and finish, and for the I flag, U flag, Z flag, black flag under Rule 30.1, etc. for OCS, for on-course side. The old rulebook talked about any part of a boat's hull, crew or equipment being on the course side. The new rulebook talks about any part of her hull crosses, etc. So all the old business about whether equipment was in the correct place or whether a person on board was in the correct place, etc., has all gone. All you have to worry about as a race officer or the boat is that the line must not be crossed by any part of the hull. This is going to be particularly interesting on downwind or crosswind starts, where you have perhaps a spinnaker, bowsprit and spinnaker, something like that, and those may well be the wrong side of the start line, but that is now irrelevant. All you have to watch for is any part of the hull crossing the line. The definition proper course has been altered to say that it is the course a boat would choose to sail the course and finish. The old rule just said to sail to finish. The other thing this new rulebook has done is to move Rule 28.2, which was about sailing the course, into definitions. There is also a change to Rule 2, fair sailing, that affects both competitors and for the note of protest committees, in that the only penalty now available for a breach of Rule 2 is DNE, or disqualification not excludable. It is no longer possible to just impose disqualification. An interesting change is to 16.2, which is about changing course. It is still the case under 16.1 that when a right-of-way boat changes course, she must give the other boat room to keep clear. 16.2 has been changed so that it only applies on a beat to windward, whereas before it was stated to be after the start. So that is a bit of clarification. However, Rule 16.2 has been changed significantly, so I will read you what they say. The old rule said, in addition, when after the starting signal a port tack boat is keeping clear by sailing to pass astern of a starboard tack boat, the starboard tack boat shall not change course if, as a result, the port tack boat would immediately need to change course to continue keeping clear. This has been changed so that it says, in addition, on a beat to windward, when a port tack boat is keeping clear by sailing to pass to leeward of a starboard tack boat, the starboard tack boat shall not bear away if, as a result, the port tack boat must change course immediately to continue keeping clear. This has been changed in two significant ways. Instead of applying to a boat that is passing astern of a starboard tack boat, it now applies when the boat is passing to leeward of a starboard tack boat. And it also means that it only applies so that you shall not bear away. This means that the starboard tack boat could luff up, but they still have to comply with 16.1, which says that you have to give room for the other boat to keep clear. So that is quite a significant change, I think. There has also been a significant change to exoneration, and this is now contained in Rule 43 instead of being all over the place within the rules as it was before. So not much has changed about the exoneration itself, except that a boat is now exonerated automatically. It does not have to be exonerated in a protest hearing. So quite how that is going to work out in practice is a bit difficult to see at the present time, as it is still necessary to have a protest hearing to deal with penalising a boat. But a boat that has been a boat that is exonerated in the new expression does not have to have it found that she is exonerated. She just is, and the boat itself has to make that decision as to whether she feels that she is exonerated or not. That is going to be perhaps a bit difficult in some cases, because 43.2 says that a boat exonerated for breaking a rule need not take a penalty and shall not be penalised for breaking that rule. The question for the boat, of course, is how do you know that A, you have broken a rule, and B, that you are exonerated for doing so? So I think in practice this is still going to throw up quite a few problems. I can see why they've made the change, because if you are exonerated, you are exonerated. But it is going to be perhaps throw some spanners in the works, perhaps, for both boats and protest committees in trying to work out how this actually applies. Over the years, I have noticed in protest hearings that quite often the protestee says that they have not heard a hail, and there has been a change in Rule 20.4 about hailing at an obstruction, and there have been some additions made. These essentially are that when the conditions are such that a hail may not be heard, the boat shall, not may, shall also make a signal that clearly indicates her need for room to tack or her response if she is the responding boat. In addition to this, the NOR may specify an alternative communication for a boat to indicate her need to tack or her response, and the NOR may require the boats to use it. This is of particular relevance to boats that carry VHF, as it makes it much easier to include an instruction in the NOR that the hail and or response shall be given by VHF. One aspect that causes particular grief is where boats apply for redress and they have not first protested the other boat and obtained a finding against the other boat. The old rule 62(1)(b) only meant that you had to prove that the other boat had broken a rule, and of course the usual way to do this is to protest the boat first. The only other possible way of proving that the other boat broke a rule is to bring evidence to that effect. Usually that would be in the form of a witness who saw the incident. The problem is that unless was the boat itself brought forward as a witness, then that evidence is not conclusive. Whereas if the boat that supposedly broke the rule is brought as a witness to give evidence that they broke a rule, then that is conclusive. And of course the offending boat cannot be penalised if they have not already been penalised in a protest hearing, or have taken a penalty on the water, or have retired. So under the old rule it was the case that you should have brought a protest hearing against the other boat even if they had retired, just to make sure that you have the evidence that you need to support your claim for redress. Under the new rule book, this situation has now been made even worse, because not only do you have to prove that the other boat broke a rule, you also have to establish that they were penalised or took a penalty. Now, what sort of penalty could they have taken? They could have done turns on the water, or they could have retired. Now, the fact that a boat retires is not evidence that they broke a rule. They could have retired for all sorts of reasons. So it would still be necessary, if you haven't already protested that boat, it would still be necessary to bring them as a witness to the redress hearing so that they can establish that they broke a rule and then retired because of it. The other alternative, as we've seen, is that you could try to establish that they did their turns. To do this, you have to either bring a representative of that boat to confirm that they did turns, or you have to bring a witness from another boat who saw them do their turns. So the situation's become a bit more complicated in terms of evidence. So the net result really is that if you want to bring a request for redress under 62(1)(b), which is for injury or damage, you really ought to bring a protest hearing first, no matter that you know the boat has retired or has done turns or whatever, because otherwise you may find that the protest committee will not find in your favour, will not find that you have grounds for redress, because you either fail on establishing that they broke a rule, or you fail on establishing that they have been penalised. So as I said before, it really is the case that you should only bring a redress hearing if you bring a protest hearing first. That's the safest way to do it. A change has been made that's been hidden away in Appendix A5.1, which governs scores determined by the race committee, for example OCS and so on. This one, they've added the words "sail the course" to the requirements to start and finish, and then have inserted a new abbreviation called NSC, which is not sail the course. So now the race committee may, if they see that a boat has missed a mark, for example, on the course, they may just score the boat NSC and leave it up to the boat to complain about this or apply for redress afterwards to see if that was correct or not. So it is no longer necessary for the race committee to protest the boat to determine that they did not sail the course. There is a problem with this in that the race committee can only see what they can see locally. So if it happens near the start or finish line, then maybe the race committee can do it. And also if a patrol boat or mark layer sees it, then they can report to the race officer who can determine whether or not to score the boat NSC. However, if they are relying on a mark layer or patrol boat, then they have to be sure that they're confident that what the boat saw was in fact a boat missing a mark or otherwise not sailing the course. So this just changes the emphasis really, so that the race committee can now just score the boat and wait for an application for redress instead of having to protest the boat. So obviously the boat will probably not know about this until they come ashore and find out what the score is. Finally, a change has been made to the definition finish, which I am very unhappy about because it causes all sorts of complications, and I have made another full video about this, and the link is in the details in the description below. So what they have done is that in the definition finish they have included a requirement to start. They also, and this is world sailing, were going to include a requirement to sail the course in the definition finish, but they dropped that because they thought it would be too difficult to implement. But we are now stuck with a definition finish that requires a boat to start. This has raised complications for races such as Round the Island race, and also for club pursuit races where we do not want boats to go back if they are OCS to restart, because it just gets in the way, and the clubs decided that they would impose a time or placing penalty instead. That is now not possible, except that World Sailing, having introduced a test rule DR21-01, enabling clubs to change the definition start, which is very unusual, but this was the only way they could get round it. My thoughts on the matter were that they should just have abolished the amendment, but they haven't done that. So what it means now instead is that if you introduce this test rule into your NOR, then you can have a breathing space of say 1 or 2 minutes where boats can still legally start, and that enables you then to put in a placing or timing penalty. It is very unsatisfactory. This has also affected other rules, because under the new definition, a boat that is OCS and therefore has not started cannot finish. So under Rule 32, when the race officer wishes to consider abandoning the race, he has to bear in mind that if a boat has crossed the finishing line and that was OCS, then the race officer does not need to take that boat into account, because it having not started, it has not finished, and therefore it is not a boat that has finished for the purposes of Rule 32. The same thing applies to Rule 35, which deals with time limits. A race officer can abandon a race if no boat has finished within the time limit. Well, in this case, if the first boat, or the only boat in fact, that has supposedly finished was OCS, then it has not finished. Therefore, the race officer can abandon the race, disregarding the boat that crossed the finishing line. This may throw up problems if that boat then applies for redress on its OCS and then finds that the race should not have been abandoned, but it then has in fact been abandoned. So this whole change to the definition finish by including a requirement to start is very complicated and should not have been introduced, in my opinion. So that brings us to the end of my little talk on the main changes to the racing rules of sailing for 2021 to 2024, and I wish you all the best in your racing and sailing. If this was useful, please subscribe and make any comments.